my name is Brent Brewer. I'm an Intercultural Studies Missions Professor here at Johnson. Many of you I've had in class in World Missions Evangelism or Encountering Cultures. I would like to start off with a quiz like we used to in the good old days, but in this world of media, we're not going to do that. So today we're going to be talking about ethics from an intercultural perspective. And I just want to start off by telling you a story. There's this company in Brazil, a factory that was getting ready to add some new machines, and they were working with a company in the United States and a company in Spain to sell them the equipment they needed. And so a group from the United States came over, and they only stayed 3 days, and they pretty quickly jumped into the business, and they looked around the factory. They then explained to them how effective their machine would be in their factory and all this. And it was pretty much a business kind of a deal. Well, soon after that, the group from Spain came, and they spent 6 days in the country. And the first couple days, they just wanted to see the city, to learn about the culture and all of this, and then even to spend some time learning more about the factory and what they produced and all of that. And then on the third or fourth day, they really got into selling the product that they came to sell. Well, at the end of all this, the Brazilian company, they sat down and they realized the American price was slightly cheaper, and it appeared from what research they had done that the American machine was probably a little superior. But in the end, they chose to go with the machines from the Spanish company. Now, if I was in class, I would have you discuss this in groups. Right now, you might just think about why did they choose the Spanish company instead of the American company? And I think you probably will discuss this in your classes as you come together. As we look now at kind of understanding the whole concept and idea of culture, I want to show you a diagram that will, and I think this is in your books as well, that will help you kind of get a better grasp of culture. A definition of culture is the combination of beliefs, feelings, values, and worldview assumptions that people make about reality, which then is observed in how we live, how we behave. And so if we think about levels of culture, we will start with what is done, behavior. And that's kind of the first thing we think about when we think of culture. If I said, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you think about culture? It might be foods, it might be different kinds of clothing, it might be the greetings that you have in a new culture, might be, the different sense of humor, lots of different kinds of things, but most of these things are surface level kinds of things that we just kind of quickly observe when we go into a new culture. And a lot of times, even in our own culture, we have people, new people visiting our culture from another country, and they may ask us, well, why do you do this? And sometimes, we're not even sure. We're like, I don't know, we just do it. And I remember when I was a missionary in Zimbabwe, Africa for about 12 years, and I remember when living there, I would often ask people there, why do you do this? And they would often look at me like, I don't know, we just do it. And so that just kind of shows us that culture is very much a part of us in ways that we don't even realize a lot of times. But as we move into a little bit deeper level of culture, we get to the feelings and values of culture. And so when we get to that, we would then ask the question, what is good or best? And so we're moving a little bit deeper here beyond just the surface level things. And obviously in different cultures, you're going to have a different perspective on these feelings and values. And so something like things like beauty or taste or pleasure or relaxation, all of those things, we have certain, what we think is good or best about those things, but obviously you go to another country and it could be completely different there. Well, who's right or wrong? And I think that's part of what we're trying to communicate here is that we're different. It's not necessarily right or wrong, it's just different. And that's how we kind of have to view this. Even as we think about church, one of these things would be worship style. And obviously, if you've been on a mission trip out of the country, you know worship styles are completely different in other places in the world. And so therefore, that is a feeling value kind of a thing. It's not necessarily a right or a wrong kind of thing that we're talking about here. Even as we think about values, some things that we might think of as more solid kinds of things where there might be a right or wrong could still be things that come up in question based on the culture. For instance, there's some places in India where if you think about, compare sexual immorality, like a man cheating on his wife, versus losing your temper in public. Now, if we would compare those, from our cultural perspective, we would obviously say that, sexual immorality would be worse than losing your temper in public. But in other places, and some places in India in particular, and maybe in other Asian contexts, honor shame cultures, we'll come back to that in a minute, but in those cultures, losing your temper in public could be viewed as a very bad thing, and even worse than sexual immorality, because in their mind, what sexual immorality is something that kind of happens in private versus what happens in public being more important. And so, again, we would say, no, that's not right. But they would say, no, our perspective is right, not yours. And so this is the thing we have to grasp about working with other cultures. In Japan, again, a kind of an honor-shame culture, these cultures are much more communal or group-oriented. And so you don't want to single anyone out for anything. And so either singling them out for something they've done badly or singling someone out like maybe they're getting a promotion or something. Neither one of those is really a good thing, because they say that the nail that sticks up has to be knocked down. And so again, from our Western perspective, we don't kind of understand, the big deal about all of that, but it's viewed very differently in these other cultures. All right, moving on, we then get down to beliefs. So we're going deeper here in our culture, and as we get to beliefs, we ask the question, what is true? And as we think about that, this sounds like we're getting to, maybe something that's more authoritative, but even here, that's still going to be, viewed very differently in different places. When we lived in Africa, one of the things that we quickly realized was that the spirit world was very much a part of the culture there. And people believed in evil spirits, they believed in good spirits, they believed in ancestral spirits, all these different kinds of things going on. So when someone would get sick, they would, sometimes they would even go to a spirit medium or to like a witch doctor kind of a person, and they would consult with this person as to why someone was sick. So, the question, for us is, why is someone sick, or what is causing someone to be sick? Whereas for them, they may be asking the question, who is causing, or what spirit is causing this person to be sick? And so obviously completely different levels there that we're talking about. And so, we would say, well, that's not very scientific, or that's not very, real to look at it from that perspective. But for them, their reality, that spirit world is very much real. Even though it's unseen, it's very much real and has influence on everything that happens for them. For us, we're saying, well, let's find out what virus it is, or what germ it is, or what's causing this problem here, and we'll find a medicine and we'll take care of it. We're not thinking about spirits and all that kind of stuff that can be a part of all of that. So again, the reality of what is true still has its own cultural implications there as we look at all of that. And then last of all, as we get to the center here, we get to worldview. And so worldview then is what is real. Now, obviously, what is true and what is real, there's not a huge distinction between those two, but it is, I think this is a significant thing. Worldview is not separate from culture, but it is included as culture as the deepest level presuppositions upon which people base their lives. And so as we think about culture then, really, if we're looking at changing culture, and especially as we're thinking about helping people to become followers of Jesus and adapting to biblical standards and principles, values, then we can't just start at the surface level. We need to really start at this worldview level to work with people, because what happens at the worldview level then is going to affect the beliefs, it's going to affect the feelings and values, and then ultimately affect the behavior. And so that's the key thing. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Now, there are three major culture worldview groups in the world today, and the first of those is those who look at things from an innocent or guilt perspective. And that would primarily be your Western cultures that we do this. I'm not going to go into much detail with these, but just wanted to kind of bring these up because it is something that we would need to understand as we dig deeper into culture and stuff. But the innocence guilt is, as I said, mostly Western, and it's more individual. So my guilt is based on internal pressure that I know I've done something wrong. Then I'm either going to have some punishment for that, or I've got to, to figure out what to do to overcome that guilt. As we move to the second group, there is honor and shame. And this is most of in the Middle East and Asian cultures. And for them, this is much more of a group, communal kind of a thing. So your honor and your shame is not so much an individual thing, it's how you're perceived in the society. And so that is a really big deal. And if you know much about population demographics in the world, you would know then that Asia having a large population, this is a significant thing in our world. And as we're thinking about going and working with other cultures, the honor-shame culture is very important. A lesser one, but also one that's certainly there, is the power and fear cultures. And this is primarily with tribal groups. We experienced this in Africa, in Southern Africa where we live, because there were still a lot of the tribal things that were still having an effect on how people live there. And so in those cultures, it's more about the unseen spirit world, as we were just talking about earlier about that example, that is a big factor for them. And so they're trying to control the spirit world to make things work out for them in the way they want. And so that is the big factor there, to how to have power over this spirit world as opposed to being in fear of this spirit world. So those are kind of your three big culture categories. And depending on where you're living or who you're interacting with, you may need to get a better grasp on those things and how they actually work. All right, moving on, we'll look at cultural differences and the messenger. I just want to look quickly at three kinds of mistakes that we often make as we are working with other cultures. Obviously, there's just the misunderstandings kind of at the cognitive level, just that we don't grasp things. And sometimes this obviously happens on the other side as well. There's a funny story about missionaries who went to the Congo back in the 50s, and they were going to a very remote area, and they took almost all their foodstuffs with them, and they had lots of canned foods, and obviously the canned foods all had pictures, if it was green beans or carrots or peas or whatever, it had pictures of those on the cans. Well, some of the families had babies, and so obviously for those people, they had baby food cans. And what's the picture on a baby food jar? And this caused great confusion among the nationals there, because they had formerly been cannibalistic people. And so they saw the pictures of peas and carrots and green beans, but then they saw the pictures of the baby on the baby food jars. And this created great confusion there. The missionaries were horrified when they found out what the people were actually thinking, and worked very hard to explain this to them, of course. So there's all kinds of misunderstandings that happen when we go into different cultures, and that's why it's so important that we take time to learn and understand and ask questions. Another problem that we have, especially as Americans, is the ethnocentrism. And, that's just the idea of viewing our culture as better than others. And we are often very guilty of that. In Africa, a lot of times we ate with our hands. We had this food called sudza. It was a kind of a cornmeal, kind of grits-like substance. And you would scoop that up, and then you would pick up some meat or some cooked vegetables or gravy or something with that and, eat it. And that was great. Always before you would eat, they'd always have a bowl with soapy water and a towel to, wash your hands so you knew your hands were clean. But, to us, sometimes the whole idea of eating with our hands seems a little bit, improper, unsanitary. But, their question would be, you go in the cafeteria to eat, how often do you think about who's had that fork in their mouth before you? We never even think of that. But that might be a question they might think of, and they would think, that's kind of unsanitary too. So again, it depends on perspective. Another one, a little more serious one, is, when we go to poor countries, we're often kind of feel really bad or shocked about seeing so many people living on the streets, homeless people or street children, things like that. And we're just like, oh, these poor people, this is such a poor country, and it's really bad. But when they come to America, one of the things that they notice here that's very shocking to them, what do you think that might be? Still has to do with a different age group of people in our country. When they see that we put our old people away in institutions to live by themselves, they are shocked and horrified. They cannot believe that we would do that, because in most of these cultures, the older people are the most honored people in the culture, and you would never think of separating them from the family. And so, again, who has it right here in terms of cultural values and beliefs? And the last one just be the idea of premature judgments. When we go in, we just want to quickly, and it's just human nature to do this anyway, we see something and we quickly want to decide whether it's right or wrong. And we just kind of have to suspend judgment when we go in and just say, first of all, wow, that's different. Even though we may be thinking, wow, that's wrong. We need to learn more about the situation before we quickly, try to make a judgment on that. And missionaries going into Africa, were horrified about all the polygamy, and they were starting churches and had church leaders, and, we got to get rid of polygamy. And, some of the consequences of that were not very, very good at all. But again, just making this quick judgment on that and how it needed to be dealt with. Today, it might be something like, the idea that most Muslims are terrorist-minded or jihad, holy war-minded, when in fact that is definitely not true. If we see our media in the country here, we kind of get that impression. But if you start meeting people from a Muslim background, talking with them, you'll find out that most Muslims, I'd say even as high as 90%, are very peaceful, peace-loving people. And they would be great neighbors and great friends. And really we have a lot in common, even from a biblical perspective, with Muslims. And so just things like that, where we just have to be careful about making quick judgments. Now, the last main point here is that Christianity has to focus on the worldview level, not on the surface level. Now, this goes back to some of the things we've already pointed out, but if we're really going to find a way to bring change into a culture, we can't make the mistake of starting with the behavior level, the surface level. But unfortunately, that's the easiest thing to address. We can go in and we can, change the way people dress, or, we can tell them to stop eating certain foods or smoking something or drinking something, or we could, tell them how they should do church, just different kinds of things that happen at the surface level there. We can tell them to stop polygamy, we can tell them to stop worshiping their ancestral spirits, all these kind of things that just kind of touch at the surface level. And, that would be the quick, easy thing to do. But, missionaries in the past and even today have certainly been guilty of that. But when we do that, we just kind of rush into things, and that creates some problems when we do that. Significant culture change always starts with changes to the worldview, and as we said before, what changes here is then going to impact the beliefs and the feelings and the behavior, and so we have to work on that. There was an Indian evangelist that told the missionaries, "Do not bring us the gospel as a potted plant. Bring us the gospel, the seed of the gospel, and plant it in our soil." Now, I think in class you'll probably discuss this and unpack this more, but, obviously the analogy of a plant, but missionaries have been very guilty of taking the gospel in and the Western wrappings and packages and beliefs and practices and just kind of setting it down and saying, okay, this is how you're going to believe, this is what you're going to believe, and this is how you're going to do church and all these kind of things. But in your groups, I want you to discuss, what would that actually look like? How would you actually go about doing that in a different way where you're really going to deal with it more at the worldview level instead of the surface level? Last of all, there's just, you'll see in your notes there, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but when they first asked me to do these presentations, I was thinking more of the practical ethical issues as opposed to the more academic things that we've been talking about. But, things like character and integrity and authenticity, many times I found that in my years in Africa that people just really kind of quickly got a sense of how authentic you were, maybe even more so than people do here in our own culture. And they could really kind of figure out whether you were going through the motions of Christianity or whether this was really something that was real in your life, you were passionate about, you were filled with the Spirit. They could really kind of pick up on this very quickly and see how you lived and watch that. Power and control is a big thing. Missionaries have often struggled to kind of let go of certain things, and an idea in being a missionary is to make disciples, plant churches, and turn leadership over to them and let them do it instead of us kind of holding on to that. And so that's definitely been a challenging one. Money and lifestyle. That's obviously, no matter where you go in the world, that's going to be a big deal and something that has to be worked through, and how you address that and the different issues related to that. People are going to be watching you closely to see how you spend your time, how you spend your money. What are you doing in regard to that? Sexual issues, again, another really big deal. Especially as we different cultures certainly have different perspectives on this, and especially for the women, you've got to be very careful of how you interact with men in other cultures. Sometimes what you would be just viewed as friendly, it comes across as very flirtatious or even sexual in their perspective, and you just have to be very careful about those kind of things and find out what's acceptable in other cultures related to that. Accountability. Who's your boss? Who do you answer to? And again, this is an important one that goes a little bit back to that power and control issue, but also just to our own spiritual development. And do we have mentors, spiritual people in our lives that are guiding us and helping us? And are we building those relationships with other people, nationals as well, that can help us do all that? All right, thank you very much, and I hope that this has helped you get a little bit of a different perspective on ethics from an intercultural perspective.